Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. Steven here with Team Euphoric, and this is day 17 of the 80 Days to Your Dream Body course. Today's protein source is going to be sardines, and today is a chest training day. And right now, I'm going to be taking you through the strength training anatomy and explaining which muscles are involved during each of the chest training exercises. Now let's get started. Now it is time for the main portion of the resistance training workout, and for the first exercise, we want to pick something that is going to focus on horizontal adduction, adduction at the glenohumeral joint. For myself, I'm going to be doing a high incline barbell bench press, and with every single repetition, what I want to do is I want to maintain retraction and depression of the scapula. So I'm going to start by squeezing my shoulder blades together, bringing them down and anchoring them into the bench. And for each of the repetitions, I'm going to be performing it with a guillotine grip, meaning that I'm going to be lowering the bar down to between the clavicle and the chin. With regard to the strength training anatomy, let's explain which muscles are going to be involved when we are doing a high incline barbell bench press with a guillotine grip. First, we're going to start at the scapula. The scapulocoastal joint, because we are maintaining retraction and depression of the scapula, we are going to be engaging the rhomboids major and minor, as well as the middle fibers of the trapezius, and we're going to be getting some recruitment of the superior and inferior fibers of the trapezius as well. And then for scapular depression, we're going to be primarily targeting the inferior fibers of the trapezius, the latissimus dorsi muscle, the pectoralis minor, and the inferior fibers of the serratus anterior. Even though we are not actively engaging them, we are maintaining a static contraction, and that is going to allow us to stabilize the scapular girdle. Next, we're going to move distally over at the glenohumeral joint. This is where we're actually getting into the active motion. With regard to the glenohumeral joint, the main thing that we're going to be focusing on is, once again, horizontal adduction, adduction. So we're bringing our arms toward the midline. Whenever we do any type of horizontal adduction, we are primarily going to be targeting the pectoralis major, the anterior deltoid, and the coracobrachialis. With regard to the pectoralis major, because we're doing a guillotine grip and the arms are out to the side, the main portion of the pectoralis major is going to be the sternal fibers. The sternal fibers run horizontally, so when we do this, we're primarily going to be targeting the sternal attachment. Then moving distally from the glenohumeral joint down to the elbow. At the elbow, we are doing elbow extension. Because we are doing elbow extension, that is primarily going to be the triceps brachii group. We're going to be hitting all three heads, the medial head, the long head, and the lateral head of the triceps. And we're also going to be getting some assistance from the anconeus muscle as well, because the anconeus is going to aid in stabilizing the elbow. But those are pretty much the muscles that we're going to be working. And with regard to the exercise that I'm doing right now, if you have any type of difficulty or shoulder pain doing a guillotine grip, you don't need to do a guillotine grip. But if you are able to do it comfortably, it's going to be terrific for hypertrophy, because when you do a guillotine grip, you're going to get a greater stretch on the pec. So by getting a greater stretch, you're going to create more myofascial tension along the pectoralis major. And by creating more myofascial tension, we're going to be able to recruit a little bit more muscle fibers and stimulate a little bit more of a hypertrophic response. And while we're resting, let's discuss the second exercise for the main portion of the chest workout. For the second exercise, once again, we want to pick an exercise that is going to focus on horizontal adduction, adduction at the glenohumeral joint. And for myself, I'm going to be doing a high incline dumbbell bench press. And for the high incline dumbbell bench press, my goal for every single repetition is I want to go nice and deep, and I want the top of the dumbbell to reach the top of my chest. Also, just as with the high incline barbell bench press, I want to focus on scapular retraction and depression and maintain an isometric contraction of those muscles to help stabilize the scapular girdle. Now, we're going to move into the strength training anatomy and explain which muscles are involved when we are performing a high incline dumbbell bench press. The first thing we want to do is take a look at what exactly is going on at the scapular girdle. Well, at the scapulocoastal joint, we are focusing on scapular retraction and depression, and we are maintaining that isometric contraction. So even though we are not actively going into scapular retraction and depression, we are going to maintain an isometric contraction. So for the scapular retractors, that's primarily going to be the rhomboids major and minor, as well as the middle fiber of the trapezius. And we're going to be getting some recruitment from the superior and inferior fibers of the trapezius as well. And then for scapular depression, that's primarily going to be the inferior fibers of the trapezius, the latissimus dorsi, the pectoralis minor, as well as the inferior fibers of the serratus anterior. Then, moving distally from there at the glenohumeral joint, we are doing horizontal adduction, adduction at the glenohumeral joint. So here's where most of the magic is happening. At the glenohumeral joint, when we are doing horizontal adduction, that's primarily going to be the pectoralis major, the anterior deltoid, and the coracobrachialis. With regard to the pectoralis major, the main fibers that we're going to be targeting is going to be the sternal fibers. The sternal fibers, they run horizontally. So whenever we do horizontal adduction, the primary fibers in the pectoralis major that we're going to be targeting is the sternal. If you guys recall, we have the sternal attachment and the clavicular. The clavicular is going to be responsible more for flexion. But because we are doing horizontal adduction, it's going to be the horizontal fibers, which is going to be the sternal attachment. Next, moving distally from the glenohumeral joint, we're going to take a look at the elbow. At the elbow, once again, we are doing elbow extension. So whenever we do elbow extension, that is going to be the triceps brachii group. And we're going to be hitting all three heads. We're going to be hitting the medial head, the long head, and the lateral head of the triceps brachii group. And we are also going to be getting some assistance from the anconeus, because the anconeus, it does assist in elbow extension, as well as it does help to stabilize the elbow. But those are all of the muscles that are going to be involved when we are performing the high incline dumbbell bench press. And while we're resting, let's discuss the third exercise in the main portion of the chest workout. For the third exercise, we want to pick a pressing exercise that is going to focus on shoulder flexion. So pressing with the elbows tucked in. For myself, I'm going to be doing a high incline neutral grip strongman log press. With regard to this exercise, as with the high incline barbell bench press and the high incline dumbbell bench press, what I want to do is maintain an isometric contraction of the scapular retractors and depressors to help aid in shoulder stabilization. Now we're going to get into the strength training anatomy and explain which muscles are involved when we are performing a high incline neutral grip strongman log press. With regard to this exercise, first let's take a look once again at what exactly is going on at the scapula. At the scapulocoastal joint, we are doing a combination of scapular retraction and depression. And once again, even though we are not actively going into retraction and depression on each rep, we want to maintain that isometric contraction to help stabilize the shoulder. With regard to the scapular retraction, that's primarily going to be the rhomboids major and minor, as well as the middle fibers of the trapezius. And we're going to be getting some recruitment of the superior and inferior fibers of the trapezius as well. And then for scapular depression, that's primarily going to be the inferior fibers of the trapezius, the latissimus dorsi muscle, the pectoralis minor, and the inferior fibers of the serratus anterior. Then moving distally at the glenohumeral joint, at the glenohumeral joint, we are doing shoulder flexion. So because we are doing shoulder flexion, that is primarily going to be the anterior deltoid, the pectoralis major, the coracobrachialis, and the long head of the biceps brachii. If you recall, the biceps brachii, we have two heads, the short head that just crosses the elbow, and the long head that crosses the elbow, and it also crosses the shoulder anteriorly. So because it crosses the shoulder anteriorly, the long head of the biceps brachii is also going to be responsible for shoulder flexion. With regard to the pectoralis major, one thing that I want to note is for the pectoralis major, for this exercise, the main fibers that we're going to be targeting are the clavicular fibers. The clavicular fibers, they attach at the medial third of the clavicle, and they are responsible for flexion. So unlike the previous two exercises where we were doing horizontal adduction and focusing on the horizontal fibers, the sternal attachment, when the elbows are tucked in and we're pressing and doing shoulder flexion, we're primarily going to be targeting the clavicular fibers. Next, moving distally from the shoulder down to the elbow joint. At the elbow joint, once again, we are doing tricep extension. Whenever we do tricep extension, that's primarily going to be the triceps brachii group. And once again, we're hitting all three heads. We're hitting the medial, the long, and the lateral heads of the tricep. And we're also going to be getting some assistance from the anconeus muscle, because once again, the anconeus muscle does assist in elbow extension, as well as it helps to stabilize the elbow joint. That was just a tiny taste of what can be found in my members only section. If you enjoyed it, become a member for only $5 a month to get access to hundreds of member only videos.